my name is Michael Harris, and this is when roles aren't enough modern permissions in Drupal with the Access Policy API. Most people haven't heard about the Access Policy API, but I think it's kind of cool, so that's why I decided to give a talk about it. Goals for this talk. First is to identify some limitations of the Drupal role system. If you've worked in Drupal for a while, you probably know the limitations of the role system, but I still like to make sure we have a common understanding. To gain awareness of the Access Policy API and when it might be useful. And to identify community resources about the Access Policy API. There are not a lot of community resources. They all fit on one slide. As a little bit of context, there is a contributed module called Access Policy API, and this is not what that is about. This is about a 2-ish years old core API that is in Drupal core that is driving parts of Drupal that no one has ever heard of. So to set the stage, I want to talk about common access problems.
So,
was that Lee? Yeah.
You say 2 years. So what version of Drupal did it go in?
I have a slide for that.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure. So I want to set the stage with some common access problems. I think of one of the main problems is right-sizing roles. It's hard to get roles to be exactly the right size in Drupal. I want to introduce the idea of the principle of least privilege. This is a best practice in system design. It says that users should only have access to the capabilities, data, and operations they need and no more. If you've ever taken someone who's new to Drupal and you've thrown them into a UI that's overwhelming to them, if you were to take a new user and you give them administrative positions, that would be bad for lots of reasons, right? You want to only give people the capabilities that they need to do the work that they needed to do. That's what the principle of least privilege is about. 2 benefits of the principle of least privilege. One, mainly around security, it reduces the impact of compromised accounts. So if you have a compromised account, that's bad, but if that account's privileges are limited to just what that account needs to do, then the blast radius is a bit smaller. If you just give everyone lots of permissions, then if their account gets compromised, then the cost of a compromised account is greater. So if you only give people the permissions, the access that they need, then the cost of a compromised account is a bit smaller. The other benefit is usability benefits. Giving people permissions that they need causes them to get confused, causes them to get distracted by UI elements that they don't need. It causes them to make mistakes. Have you ever had people accidentally delete something that they should not have had access to in the first place? The fact that they had access to it in the first place meant that you were violating the principle of least privilege. So only giving people what they need gives you some pretty big usability benefits is kind of the point that I want to make. It's easier to learn and they don't make mistakes. So let's walk through a couple of scenarios. I call these scenarios problems with role granularity. Imagine you have a site. Your site has a role called content editor. That content editor can create new nodes and can create new drafts, but that content editor cannot publish, unpublish, or delete them. Imagine you have another role that's a content reviewer. That role can create new nodes, create new drafts, publish, unpublish, delete, and manage menus. So you have a workflow where one person can write and another person actually has to approve and publish and can do all kinds of things. This is fine, this is a perfectly normal setup, but imagine you have a problem. Your organization is hosting an event this weekend, and during the event, a content editor needs to update content frequently and on demand. Well, our content editor doesn't have permission to publish their new drafts. That's something only our content reviewer can do. So how do we solve this problem? Do we grant our content editor the content reviewer role and violate our principle of least privilege and give them permission to mess up the menus even though they don't need the menus? Do we want to create a new role? And if you've been on a Drupal site with way too many roles to begin with, the temptation to add another role is it's there, but the permissions page has terrible usability to begin with, right? Do you write custom code so that that person can do what they need to do only in the situation that they need to do? There's no great answer here. And the reason there's no great answer here is because roles are kind of funky. And that's the point I want to get at. Your roles are either too chunky or they're too fine-grained and you have way too many of them. Another example illustrating the same principle, imagine your site has 10 menus. 10 menus, not actually a lot of menus. Your sites probably have more than 10 menus. Drupal core only provides the administer menu permission, which gives people way too many permissions on their menu. There's just one menu position and one menu permission, and it's very large. Maybe you have a contributed module like simple menu permissions, which gives CRUD permissions per menu. So now you can build roles granularly and not give every user permission to every menu. So this is what you have. And your problem, you may not want every user to have access to every menu. You may want some users to be able to edit some menus, but not others. How do you approach this? Do you create one menu editor role that has permission to every menu? Do you create one or more roles for each menu? So this could easily be 10. This could easily be one additional role per menu, so the number of roles you have in your site gets really big really quickly. Or do you write some custom code to do whatever you want? So again, there's no great solution here, is kind of the point that I want to get at. And that's kind of the first problem that the access policy API was designed to solve. Another problem, and we'll get to how to solve some of these questions in a minute. Another problem that goes even deeper than those problems is that roles can't handle context. So if you have a difficult access requirement, let's imagine a few use cases. Imagine you have a website with premium subscribers, and premium subscribers should be able to buy VIP tickets. This is fine. You create a role called premium subscriber. You create a permission called buy VIP tickets. You assign the permission to the role, and we're fine. But then you get another requirement that says, so should any user who has won a contest. Do you want to create a contest winner role? That doesn't really make sense. It's not a great, roles kind of break down when you add that second requirement. Imagine you have another requirement that says content editors should be able to create and edit basic pages. This is fine. We create a role called content editor. We give them the create and edit basic pages permissions. Fine. But we add another requirement that says, but only if they have completed security training in the last year. That's kind of a place where a role can't look into your user and tell if they've done something in the last year. Imagine another requirement that says conference registrants should be able to propose sessions. That's fine. We create a role called conference registrant. We give them the proposed session permission, but only if the submission window is open. The only submission window for the conference is open. So these are all requirements where roles just kind of break down. Roles really can't handle the more contextual requirements. So use cases that roles generally can't handle are when your business requirements require access to vary based on context, like time of day, time of week, session attributes, are they logged in from the right place, user attributes, entity values, or configuration. If you want someone's permissions to vary based on the day of the week, for example, they can only do certain activities during the work week, but not on the weekend. That's something that roles can't handle. So roles can't handle this stuff. There's nothing wrong with the permission system, but you need a way to assign permissions other than roles. Historically, roles have been the only way to assign permissions. We need a way to assign permissions other than roles. And that's really what the Access Policy API was designed to solve. The Access Policy API was designed to say, even if you don't have a particular role, I can still give you this permission. I can give you this permission on Monday, but not Tuesday. I can give you this permission only if the submission window for the conference is open. I can give you this permission only if you've won a contest. It just gives a lot more flexibility. I can give you this permission only if you're logged in from the right IP range. If you're logged in from the wrong IP range, I can take away a permission. Those are things you can't do with roles, but that you can do with the Access Policy API. So that's the problem So that's the problem we're trying to solve, and we want to talk about how to solve it. So when do you want to consider access policies? You're writing, so signs when you want to consider access policies are you're writing access code in places like hook entity access, hook entity field access, if you're writing your own access checker for a route, if you're writing code for the access key on a render array, if you're writing form alters, if you're deciding when menu links are enabled, and if your custom code is more complicated than checking a permission. We're going to have to write custom code at some point. This is really a strategy for how do we write the custom code in a way that's the least painful. If your custom code is just a permission check, that's great. If your custom code is more complicated, that's when you should pause and ask if an access policy is right for you. An extremely brief history of the access policy API. In 2020, the group module gets a stable 1.0 release. Any familiarity with the group module? Okay, half the hands, great. Yeah, so the group module gets a stable 1.0 release in 2020. Christian Vandeninde, who is one of the maintainers of the group module, goes to Pittsburgh Drupal Camp. They have a session called Pittsburgh where community members can request funding for various initiatives. The proposal for the access policy API is accepted at Pittsburgh DrupalCon, and then in 2024 in Drupal 10.3, the access policy API is released in core. The access policy API is a lot of what is happening under the hood of the group module, and it's extracted to be put in the core. I'm going to close this. Okay, so the stuff that makes the group module cool has now been abstracted, and it's now in Drupal core. So that's our extremely brief history. Okay, now we've talked about what it is and where it comes from. Let's talk about the bare minimum we need to know to get started. It gets much more complicated than we can talk about in 45 minutes, but this is sort of what you need to know at a high level. So how Drupal builds a user's permission list in 10.3 or greater. Access policies are tagged services, and there's a service collector that collects them. The service collector for access policies is called the access policy processor. And what happens is the access policy processor will gather all of your access policies, and it will loop through all of them. And it will say, hello, access policies. Do any of you want to give this user any permissions? And access policies can say, yes, here are the permissions we want to give the user. The name of the method for this is called calculated permissions on the access policy interface. Every access policy implements access policy interface, and if you want to add permissions, then you implement the calculate permissions method. The service collector will loop through all of the access policies again, and then each access policy has the opportunity to modify given permissions. That's really cool because access policies can actually take away permissions. So you can take away a user permission that someone else gives them. Maybe a role grants them an access policy, but you actually want to take it away. That example where a user needs to complete security training or else they can't edit a node, that may be a place where your access policy wants to remove a permission. And the method for that is the alter permissions method on the access policy. We're going to go over a couple of examples for this, so it's not abstract. I just want to quickly get through some of the higher level stuff. So the way that we add permissions to a user is we're building something called a calculated permissions item. These are kind of the most important properties and methods on the calculated permissions item to get started. There's an array of permissions, and those are the places that your access policies are adding permissions to. They're adding them to this array. And then there's a Boolean called is admin. Admins they pass all access checks. So if someone's an admin that we don't even need this permissions array, we just ask if they're an admin. So that's fine. And some of the most important methods are is admin. has permission, and then get permissions to get the whole permissions array. Access policies are tagged services. So if you want to create an access policy, this is the service definition. You're going to put your services.yaml. This is very cool because that means because they're services, access policies can have other services injected into them. So if you want to grant or deny permissions based on some calculation that you do and you need to do an entity query, that's fine. Because it's a service, we can inject the relevant services there. And then you put the access policy name and the tags in the definition, and that's how our services know to collect them. Access policy base is the base class that you want to, when you write your own access policy, you want to extend access policy base. You want to implement your own methods as needed. And then you want to place your access policies in the access folder of your module. And again, we'll demo all of this in just a moment. The most important methods on your access policy is going to be calculate permissions. This is where you add permissions to a user. We talked about the access policy looping through all of the access policies. Calculate permissions is really where you want to add permissions. It's also the place to add cache tags and cache max age. All of this permission stuff, all of this access policy stuff, these are cacheable, so you need to be able to put the cacheable metadata there. And you want to put your cache tags and your cache max age in your calculate permissions method, and there are demos of that as well. The second method you want to learn about is the alter permissions. We said when the access policy processor makes that second loop through all of the access policies to potentially remove permissions from someone, we do that in the alter permissions method. And this is also a place to add cache tags and cache max age. You might notice that I'm not mentioning cache contexts. That's because there is a separate method called get persistent cache contexts. And this is the method where you want to add your cache contexts. It's a little weird to add your cache context in a different place than your other cacheable metadata, but you get used to it. And I want to jump, okay, so that's sort of what you need to know to get started with the Access Policy API. If you want to really sort of dig deeper into the guts of the API, you can check out a couple of other methods on the Access Policy interface. You can look at the Access Policy processor. There is an item that we're going to see called refinable calculated permissions, and that's kind of a wrapper around your calculated permissions item. Not relevant for our purposes today, but again, if you want to go deeper into it, that's another place you can look. This will all make so much more sense when we get to demos, so I want to jump into some demos. Any questions before we jump into demos? I know that was a fire hose, but we could just look at some of the stuff, in the wild. Great. I want to go back and I want to look at these three use cases that we talked about. Premium subscribers should be able to buy VIP tickets, and so should any user who has won a contest. And then content editors should be able to create and edit basic pages, but only if they've completed security training. I have a demo of these two use cases, and I'm going to show it off. So I have two browsers. I have a website. This is just a website I created to demo. On the left, I am an administrator, and on the right, I am just a regular user. I have two users. I have the admin and the user. My user is a premium subscriber, and so my premium subscriber can buy VIP tickets. So I click Buy VIP Tickets, and it tells me I have the Buy VIP Tickets permission. That's great. If I take this role away from my user, and I save it, then all of a sudden I get access denied. I no longer have the Buy VIP Tickets menu item in my menu. I can't buy VIP tickets. But if we look at our requirements, it says not just VIP or not just premium subscribers should be able to buy VIP tickets, but so should any user who has won a contest. So maybe my website has a content type called contest. I am going to call it my contest, and I can put who the contest winner is. So I will type in the word user. It gets our user member. I save it. Now my user has won a contest. So if I refresh my user page, all of a sudden my user can buy VIP tickets again. That's great. It appears up here. It tells me I have the permission. I didn't give my user this role back. So if we go into our people list, our user, is not a premium subscriber, and I haven't written, custom access logic. This is still working based on the permissions. But what's done is I've just written an access policy, and I'm going to show off that access policy now. So I have an access policy in my custom module called contest winner access policy. And we're just going to walk through this service to talk about the concepts we talked about. We're extending access policy base, which is great. We're injecting a couple of services. This is fine. Oh no, this is the wrong policy. All right, this is our contest winner access policy. Great. We are injecting our entity type manager. We are implementing calculate permissions, the calculate permissions method. And a lot of these, and we're just going to walk through this calculate permissions method. The way we start a calculate permissions method is that we get the currently existing calculate permissions from the parent. We just call parent calculate permissions. What we're doing here, this is basically the business logic. I'm doing an entity query for any contest winner that the current user has won. That's all we're doing. Entity query, give me all the contests that our user has won, and we're saying if our entity query is not 0, if there are actually any nodes that return from our entity query, we are going to create a new calculated permissions item, and we are going to add the buy VIP tickets permission to the calculated permissions item. And then we are going to add our calculated permissions item to the calculated permissions. And that's how I get my permissions. One thing to note out here is this argument of overwrite false. Basically, if you think in PHP terms, what we want to do is like an array merge. We want to merge the existing array of permissions with my new array of permissions because we want to combine them. If we put overwrite true, we would replace the existing array of permissions with my permissions. But I don't want to replace the existing permissions. We just want to add to them. So that's why I'm going to put overwrite false. Then we need to put our cacheable metadata. So we're just saying calculated permissions. The cache tag that we want to add is the node list for the contest. And that basically says every time any contest node is edited, we bust our cache and we have to recalculate our user's permission. And we can demonstrate that. Let's say that our user has been disqualified. We're going to take away who the winner was. We're going to save it. Now our user has no longer won a contest, and their ability to buy a VIP ticket is gone. The reason that our permissions update instantly is because we've added the appropriate cache tag. We look at our get persistent cache contexts method, which is where we add our cache contexts. And our cache context is our user because we want a different set of permissions cached per user. And that's how we add a permission to a user without giving them a role. We implement calculated permissions, and we implement our hidden cache contexts. I think this is pretty cool. You could not do this with roles, but you can do this with sort of a custom service. We're not changing the access handler to the node create form, or we're not changing the access handler to, we haven't written a new access handler for our custom route. We're still letting permissions do the job, we're just changing how we hand out the permissions. Let's look at our other example, a little more complicated. We are our second example. Content editors should be able to create and edit basic pages but only if they've completed security training in the last year. So let's look at how we've implemented that. In my site configuration, I have added a configuration called security training valid, and I said it is valid for 365 days. So if you have completed security training in the last 365 days, you should be able to, create and edit nodes. So let's look at our user. This user has, let's make this last March. So I'm going to say this user completed security training, March 1st, 2025. 2025, okay, that's not right. It's going to take forever. 2025, there we go. Yeah, okay, so this user created security training last March. Let's give them the content editor role. So this is a content editor who completed security training last March. It is currently February, so our user should have permission to create and edit nodes. And that is true. I can go into content, I can create a basic page. That's great. If our user had completed security training, let's say last January, so that's outside of the 1 year window, suddenly our user should lose the ability to create pages. And sure enough, our add content is gone because we've we're no longer abiding by that policy. Let's see how we actually code that access policy. So I have another access policy called has completed security training. We're implementing alter permissions because alter permissions is where we take away permissions. Let's just walk through the method. We have an array of permissions to revoke. We have some business logic to figure out, has it been a year since the last, since the user has completed security training. I'm not going to walk through the business logic. We're adding some cacheability. So we want this access policy to, we want the cache tags to be based on both the user and the settings. So if anything about the user changes, we want to recalculate the permissions. If anything about that setting changes, that configuration changes, we want to recalculate our settings. I put a cache max age here because we kind of want to recalculate these permissions somewhat frequently. If I completed my security training a year ago yesterday, then my permission should be good for yesterday, but today I should lose them, so we need to put a cache max age. And then we have some business logic, and let's say our business logic decides we should revoke the user. The user hasn't completed security training within the time interval. So what we're going to do is we are going to get the permissions from our old permissions item. We have our calculated permissions. We're getting the calculated permissions item. We are getting the permissions. And then we're saying our new permissions is, in PHP terms, it's an array diff between the old set of permissions and the permissions we want to revoke. So an array diff basically just takes one array and it says, take out everything from this one array that is also in the second array. So it's basically, we're taking the permissions to revoke out of the old permissions, and that's our new permissions. We are creating a new calculated permissions item, which has our new permissions. And when we add our calculated permissions item to our calculated permissions, we want to set the override parameter true, because again, we don't want to merge our permissions into the old permissions. We want to replace the old permissions with our permissions, and which is our new permissions are just the array diff of the old permissions minus the permissions we want to revoke. So this is where we have our calculated permissions item replace what was there. We set get persistent cache context to user because we want these cache items. We want our permissions to be cached based on the user, and that's how it works. So imagine we get a sudden a directive from the CEO or something, and the CEO says, a year is no longer appropriate. We want to make it 6 months. So let's set our last our last completed security training back to March 1st. So our users should be able to add content, that's fine, but we get the sudden directive that says, oh no, it's no longer a year, it's 6 months. You need to kick everyone out from 6 months immediately. So we can change our 365 to 180. Because our access policy has a cache tag based on that, that configuration, we can change this to 180. We can refresh our user, and all of a sudden our user no longer has permission because they have a completed security training in the last 180 days instead of in the last 365 days. So we were able to take that permission away, and it gives us that kind of flexibility. So those are any questions about the demonstrations? Yeah.
I have a question about the 6-hour cache window.
Sure.
And how it was expired by changing to 180 days. I missed that part.
Good question. So the way that, two separate questions. Cache max age is just, so cacheability, we're basically telling Drupal, you have to recalculate this at least every 6 hours. And that's what the cache max age is. It's like, if it's been 6 hours since you calculate this, recalculate it no matter what. When we set a dependency on that 365 days or 180 days, that's a cache tag. And so that basically means, based on some event, yeah.
Those are the ones, gotcha.
Yeah. But that actually gets to a point that the cacheable metadata for access policies is so important to get right because you're dealing with permissions. And if you get your cacheability metadata wrong, then bad things can happen. Let me run through just the last slides and then I'll grab a few more questions. Okay, so let's go back to the demos. Should I use the access policy API? Well, the glib answer is that you already are. Because the user role system has been refactored to be an access policy. So user roles are just another access policy. If you've ever wondered how user 1 gets all of the permissions, well, there's now a super user access policy, which gives user 1 all the permissions. These are the only 2 access policies that ship in Drupal core, but you can write your own now. When should you write your own? You should write your own when you have a lot of users with very different access needs, and you need those needs to vary based on time, location, configuration, entity values, user attributes, anything that's more contextual than a role. If you can model your access needs with permissions, but it's the roles that get fuzzy, that's when you can consider an access policy. At some point, we're all going to have access needs. That's going to have to be a lot of custom code. The goal of the access policy API is for you to be able to hang on to permissions a little bit longer by extending them beyond just roles. So the access policy API can't do everything, but it delays the moment where you have to write a lot of really weird access logic. You have to be comfortable with cache tags, cache context, and cache max age. Warnings. These make security audits more difficult because the permissions page, it's a page with a lot of checkboxes, and you can tell what it is. There are no checkboxes here. That you just have to know what the code is. Writing any custom logic makes access audits, permissions audits more difficult. So just a caveat there. There is a Drupal core issue asking for a page in the administration to summarize your access policies. If you want to look at that, that hasn't received any traction, but at least people have recognized this problem. Please create a controller that summarizes all of our access policies. And these things are really powerful. You can add and remove any permission, or you can make any user an admin based on these policies. So your caching has to be correct. Final thoughts, modules that use the access policy API, there aren't a lot of them. All of this stuff is abstracted from the group module, but group didn't actually start adopting the core implementation until the 4.0 branch, which is still in dev, so if you want to look at how group is doing it. External roles is a tidy little module. The event platform, which is something that Martin Anderson Klutz wrote, the example for only letting people submit sessions while sessions are open is actually that's something that uses an access policy. So we can look at calculate permissions. We basically say, are sessions open and is the user a speaker? If so, give them the create session content role. And we set a cache context for our sessions open. That's how we grant that permission contextually. Here are some resources. This is everything on the internet about access policies. It's in one slide. Take a couple hours to be one of the foremost leading experts in the world. This episode of Talking Drupal is really good. I would really point to that. I would really encourage you to also read Drupal Access Policy API Demystified by Spark Fabric. That's the best tutorial that I have found. We have 5 minutes left. Any questions? Yeah.
What about taking a role away based on some context?
So the question is, can access policies take a role away from someone based on context?
Or give it to someone.
Or give a user a role based on context. I don't believe that that is something that the access policy does. I haven't tried it, but I really think it's just acting on the set of permissions. It's not really acting on the set of roles. Good question, though. Other questions? Yeah.
You set the max timeout for 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I want to be really clever and calculate the distance, the time between now and then, is that just a bad idea because there could be demons sliding down that hole, or is it just no criticism? I get this presentation in a demo.
Totally, yeah. So basically the question is, so in my demo, I set the cache max age to 6 hours for our completed security training. I guess you could do the math right here. I wouldn't. You could set this to 0 to force it, to calculate every time. If because maybe the 6 hours after it turns midnight, someone has permission that they shouldn't. Depends on how strict your context is going to be. But it's probably the safest to set that cache max age to 0, so that it has to be calculated. What's that?
Is it more success too, or if you log in at 4 a.m.?
Any other
Fire
questions?
them the day before.
Yeah.
Can this be used in any way to affect field permissions?
Can it be used in any way to affect field permissions? So if I am, for example, some people have access to this field, some people don't. Anywhere, so you can use a form alter and just say, or there are a couple of hooks, form alter is one of them, they're actually better hooks than that one, but just say, if user, has permission, blah, 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 they get access to the form, or they get access to the field. If user does not have permission, blah, 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 then access equals false in that render array. Absolutely, you have to be a little careful because recently Drupal has made forms the ability to opt into the cacheability, if that makes any sense. Because historically forms haven't been cacheable, but I think that's I think this is a recent-ish change that you can start opting forms into cache. But anywhere you do a permissions check, this will work. So if your field access depends on a permission, you can use this. Yeah.
You mentioned that there's a contrib module with the same name, but it's not the same.
That's right.
Are they not related at all?
They are motivated by the same impulse, and that is where the similarities.
Okay, so that is not a viable solution. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if the contrib module is still under active development.
The answer is always use core.
Yeah. But the only similarity between those two is a recognition of the architectural approach had promise. And I can't say anything about the contrib module because I haven't looked at it in a long time.
I guess if you're on something lower than 10.3, which isn't supported, then that's
I'm
your
restarting my recording. Yeah.
I only found out about that like a month ago, that minor versions lost support, because it was like current and backward, right?
There we go.
And suddenly, what do you mean I'm not on a supported version?
Any other questions about any of this stuff?
One last question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I noticed that it's adding and removing permissions. But if like I wanted to give a user, say, access to edit one node or something I would maybe use hook entity access for, where it's not really all nodes of this type except after midnight but before 6 a.m. kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Would that be would I still want to use hook entity access, I guess?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question is if we want to give access to like one specific node, how does, is this a viable solution? I find that the access policy API breaks down when we're talking about individual entities. I wrote a module not too long ago where you could create a user reference field, and then any user reference by that field would have access to the field, or would have access to the node. At that point, permissions kind of break down, because if you're calculating from entity to entity, that's kind of too specific for permissions, if that makes any sense. But I had the same thought, and I couldn't make it work. Maybe people smarter than I am can.
Hate to debate on the Laravel. Laravel it's mostly a policy API.
Yeah.
There is a third-party roles and permissions thing, but they also have gates, where you can set up a middleware, a single gate. Can I walk through this gate? And you can set up for that particular thing. I was like, do they have gates as well? Because that's awesome. I used to do things like that all the time.
Yeah.
For one particular thing.
Well, nodes have that node grant system, which is nice, and that works in a similar kind of way. If only all entity types had grants, but it is not yet the case.
And then you can't remember who you gave it to.
That's true. Yeah. All right, we are at time, so I'm going to say thank you to everyone. And if you want to talk more about the access policy API, come find me.